The Huntsman of Adamos, The Huntsman's Honor, Chapter 4. I need to apologize. The audio recording for the previous chapter, for some reason the printout had that chapter listed as Chapter 4, but this is actually Chapter 4. Evolution to Revolution. 2 lunars after leaving the King's Academy. The huntsman Lord Yurieth and the protector Lord Yurieth said farewell. Then Yurieth went with Master Material to the front lines, while Yurieth stayed back with the defense forces to fight alongside and retrain those who came from the other academies. Regulus and the 7 guardians who still lived were determined to change the tide of the war and push the Zelusians from their world by century's end, a mere 43 years in the future. The battle lines were across the continent. Everything on this side belonged to the Aetherians, but on the other side, the forces of Zelusia held sway. Every resource was being stripped and sent back to their kingdom. The industrialized sections spewed black smoke into the air at an alarming rate, creating soot that fell like snow in the winter and as acid rain in the summer. Yurieth almost couldn't contain his horror as he looked across the landscape. Your aura betrays you, young huntsman. If you are going to learn to travel as a ghost, you must contain everything you feel and everything you are. Not even the wind nor shadows should know you pass them by, his mentor explained. Yurieth took a deep breath and cleared his mind, remembering the exercises where he had been shut in a dark room, and Material had refused to let him leave until he had become as empty as the room. Every day, for weeks, Yurieth had tried and failed. Then he had an epiphany. Instead of trying to think about being nothing, or static, or wind, or meditating on the ambient sounds around him, he actually just didn't think. He simply was. Every sound went through him like the empty air. He didn't think about them, he just existed with them. Material had sent Axion to get him, and the Master Huntsman had not known which room to look in. The next step in Yurieth's training was to learn the fighting style and assassin's stealth, which was different from a huntsman's. He absorbed the knowledge with a speed that surprised them all. Breathing out, he became still to the very core of his soul. Very good, Yurieth. Just remember, you cannot let anything you see affect you. We are going to a place many huntsmen have failed to return from because they let their emotions overcome them and were discovered. Is it really that bad, Master Material? Yurieth asked in a calm voice that was the opposite of his inner turmoil buried deep inside. The stories he had heard made the far side of the battle lines sound like a place of horrors. It is so much worse than you have heard in the gossip. Tell me if you need to come back, and we will, Material promised. But Yurieth shook his head. No, Master Material. I would not dishonor myself or your training thusly. I know my duty. Very well. We will cross a little before dusk, when the light is hazy. 3 days later. Yurieth wanted to vomit as he hid in a room filled with the desecrated dead of Etheria. He wanted to weep and shout profanities, and most of all, he wanted to murder every Zelutian he could see in the street below. Forcing himself to look beyond the broken window, he saw their prey, a Zelutian assassin of the Blood Brotherhood, meeting Materiel. The murderer of the innocent looked directly at Yurieth's window, then past it, as he held his feelings and his soul silent. Drawing his bow, Yurieth poured every ounce of his hatred into the strength of the shot. Then he felt what Materiel couldn't see: 3 more assassins creeping up on his mentor on the far side of the building. So he moved quickly for a better line of sight. Adding a second, then a third arrow, and adjusting his aim, he loosed the shafts, then repeated the shots before turning back to see Materiel kill the one on the roof. 4 assassins of the Brotherhood lay dead as Yurieth retrieved his arrows. "You have done well, Journeyman Yurieth. Tell me, how did you know about the 3 on the other side?" Materiel asked as they tossed the bodies into an incinerator not far away. I felt them. I felt them like the vibration of wrongness from a rabid animal. And then I saw them," Yurieth answered honestly. Interesting," Materiel hummed, as they slipped from shadow to shadow. As dusk painted the sky, they crossed back into Etherian territory and flew back to the Defense Forces base camp. Materiel told him to get some sleep. They would meet with the High Command in the morning, but instead, Yurieth sought out his brother. He needed to talk about what he saw during the 3 days they were deep in the Zelutian-occupied lands. The abuse of children and elders, the violation of young women and men, the murdered masses whose blood was taken for the thirst of the berserker warriors and the blood mages. It was all so horrible, and Yurieth had vowed to end it any way he could. Over 4 million Etherians were trapped in the occupied lands, and every day there were fewer and fewer. He caught sight of Materiel ducking into the building that had held the highest command ranks and followed, wondering why his mentor had lied about meeting with the High Command on the morrow. Once on the roof, Yurieth closed his eyes, and he felt for his mentor's tainted soul, then followed. He dropped down and let himself in a window. Coming to an empty storage room on the 15th floor, he simply listened to those beyond the wall. "But I don't know how he did it," Materiel was insisting. "Surely you must have some idea, some inkling." It was the guardian of the king's house, the royal guardian Xanthus. "He may not know, Xanthus," Regulus spoke up. "Lord Yurieth's powers are unlike any other huntsman I have encountered in my house or the House of Adamos. If Master Assassin Materiel says what Yurieth did today was impossible, then I believe him." "This is insanity. Having an assassin of the Blood Brotherhood training our huntsmen?" Guardian Voltaeus of the House of Vulca protested. Master Huntsman Axion spoke next. "Voltaeus, there is almost no difference between assassin's magic and huntsman magic. It is only the choice of the wielder's heart that makes it different. Is it possible that the young huntsman has some sort of hybrid magic? His mother is a priestess oracle, is she not? A female asked. Yurieth's shock almost gave him away. He did not know women were allowed onto battlefields. No, Amazoni Callisto. He has huntsman's magic and some warrior magic. A descendant of his houses would be an oracle, a healer, or a warrior, not both. And oracles are never warriors, Axion explained. Though Master Huntsman in some case possess a rare type of healing magic, it is more to sustain a wounded comrade until they can heal or be healed, rather than to actually heal them. Material added, in truth, we do not know what Yurieth is truly meant to be, but our concern is that his emotional temperament will make him vulnerable to the darkness, because it makes him weak. It is why we have refrained from teaching him the most powerful of our talents. Yurieth slipped away, jumping from the open window to the street below, and retreating rapidly from the command building. Back in his own quarters, he did not weep for the horrors he had seen, but because his mentor's lack of faith in him. They were just like his father, saying encouraging words to his face, without the conviction to tell him the truth of their concerns or teach him completely. He had just begun to believe in himself and trust that his mentors believed in his destiny. To hear the doubts and their conviction that he would fall into darkness was unbearable and hurt him deeply. He would never dishonor himself by becoming a shadowed one. The young huntsman felt his mentors returning and focused his body into a sleep-like state, doing the oracle meditations he had learned as a child from his mother. Yurieth seemed deeply asleep when Material and Axion walked by his room and paused for a moment before continuing on. But in his mind, he folded his pain in upon itself and made a box to keep it in. If his mentors wanted him to be emotionless, he would be. He would turn his pain and outrage into cold action and honor. He would prove their concerns false and make them proud of him. And in adjunct, his father, he would show them just how wrong they were about the uses of huntsman's magic. Lord Yurieth of Adamos vowed he would evolve and recreate the role of huntsman in war. 12 years after graduating from the King's Academy, Yurieth walked through the dusty streets of a city on Seleucia. The Amazoni warrioress Callisto walked between he and Material. Children begged for scraps, while women of every age offered themselves to passer-bys with vulgar, tawdry shouts. Yurieth was glad they were finally leaving this forsaken planet after 10 years of wandering and spying. Suddenly, there were shouts, and everyone fled from the streets. The assassin, the huntsman, and the Amazoni ducked into an alley and went up the side of a building. Men dressed in black got out of a transport and kicked in a door, dragging the screaming children and terrified women out into the street and throwing them into a windowless container. Yurieth clenched his fist, so Callisto rested her hand on his glove. You cannot save them. If they aren't harvested this day, it will simply be another day. That is why we need the Etherian king to send your warriors here. We have to overthrow King Apollyon and his consort, the Dark Queen, Baalonia. I will find a way, Yurieth promised. Materiel laughed cruelly. Don't make promises for your king, young huntsman. You know Xerxes is perfectly content to let the war reduce the excess common-housed population. This war could go on for a millennium or more at this rate, and neither of our kings would even notice. Yurieth looked at the street below and strode to the center of the building. He loosed a single explosive-tipped arrow into the power conduits several city sections away. The explosion echoed through the city like thunder, a sound not heard since the rains had stopped falling decades earlier. Most of the warriors working the harvest went to see what the commotion was, leaving only 2 behind. Yurieth dropped to the street. He effortlessly killed the pair that stood guard and opened the container. To those inside, he spoke one Zulusian word: run. The prisoners fled in terror of the assassin dressed in the colors of the Blood Brotherhood. A woman ran out of another building, screeching at the fleeing ones to stop. She began to beat on Yurieth's chest. You've killed us all. You should have let them be taken for resettlement. With a flick of his wrist, Yurieth broke her neck and dropped her on the pavement. Looking around, he pulled off his mask and head covering, revealing the truth of what he was. His golden hair and silver eyes were not those of a Zulusian, and everyone peeking at him knew it. I am a huntsman of Etheria, and we will be coming soon to free you, he announced in their language. There is no resettlement. Those taken to never return are killed for their blood, and their flesh is given back to you as food. I suggest you all flee this district, unless you want to be murdered and eaten. He pulled his headgear back on and climbed the vertical face of a dilapidated building, disappearing over the ledge just as the warriors came back. This time, the crowds didn't get into the containers without resistance. A riot broke out, and the harvesters were killed. It spread from one district to another until the whole of the outlying city was aflame with violence. After they fled to the spaceport and prepared to board a craft for the 3-day trip to Etheria, Callisto held back. I'm not going with you. Her dark brown eyes were sad but determined. Yurieth looked at her shocked, but Materiel shrugged and slipped away. You have to. The Amazoni are under a sentence of death if they are captured. You'll be killed if they find you, Yurieth insisted. Callisto shook her head, refusing. I have family here, hiding in the Amazo Mountains. We were warriors once, and yet we do nothing for our fellow citizens. You did more today than we have in centuries. It is time we stood up and fought for the light again on our own world. so those in exile on Etheria can return home. She pulled down his mask and pressed a kiss to his lips. Goodbye, Yurieth. Thank you for everything. In a moment, she had vanished through the billowing smoke and wind-borne sands like a mirage. Settling into the stowaway compartments on the transport, Materiel shook his head in disappointment. Your altruism and heroic ideals are like a disease, Huntsman. Perhaps, Yurieth answered, but my father always said, evil thrives when the good stand silent. His mentor snorted. 10 years on this forsaken world, and you still believe there is good here? Yurieth sighed and closed his eyes. It only takes one master assassin. It only takes one with honor to start a revolution. And that is the end of chapter 4. The next chapter is chapter 5, Thorns of a Wild Rose. Again, I apologize for the misnumbering incident. I hope to fix that soon. Thank you for listening.